What's going on, everybody? Today we are going to continue our conversation on metabolism. The last couple of lectures we talked more so about cellular metabolism, but in this lecture we'll be talking more about gross metabolism and metabolism in the human body as a whole. Our overall metabolism is going to be impacted by when we have last consumed a meal. And so if we've consumed a meal in, the past couple of hours, we are going to enter what's called the absorptive state. And so we're going to take in those nutrients, take in those foods, those liquids, break them down, and then ingest all those nutrients, all those carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins that we get from our food through the GI tract. And so we'll have this continuous tube from our mouth out to the other side, and we'll talk more about the digestive system in future lectures. But that absorptive state, we're actually absorbing those nutrients in from the meals that we consume. And then we have the post-absorptive state is when there aren't any nutrients within the GI tract, and then we have to break down our energy stores in order to get those nutrients. Here we can see an overall figure of the absorptive state. So we're going to break down foods in our gastrointestinal tract, and then all the glucoses, the amino acids, and those fats are going to be absorbed in the bloodstream and then delivered. You can see the many routes of glucose where it could be used as energy it could be used for ATP production in most tissues, or it could be stored in the skeletal muscles and the liver as glycogen. Triglycerides are mostly going to be stored in our adipose tissue. So here you see that those triglycerides are going to be in those adipose cells and then held onto. And then amino acids can be broken down for energy too, or they're going to be used to build proteins in our cells. We are going to have many reactions that take place during the absorptive state. So we're taking that food that we are consuming, and then we are breaking it down, and we're either going to use that glucose, those amino acids, and those lipids, and break them down or catabolize them in order to get energy, or we're going to use all those things and we will store them. So again, there's breakdown of those glucoses, amino acids, and lipids for energy, but we could also use those amino acids to make proteins in our cells. We could also form glycogen, so glycogenesis. We are generating glycogen, so combining multiple glucose molecules together to store it, either in our skeletal muscles or our liver. We have lipogenesis, so we're generating those lipids there, so we're storing those triglycerides. We're combining fatty acid tails to glycerol in order to form them, and then we are transporting those triglycerides to store them within our adipose tissue. So overall, the absorptive state, we're breaking down nutrients and then using whatever materials we've broken down to either use for energy or store them for later use. Here we can see the hormones that are released during the absorptive state, and the main one is insulin. This is a major anabolic hormone for not only glucose, but for amino acids and fats as well. So, when insulin is released, you're going to see a diffusion of glucose and amino acids coming into the cell. It's also going to trigger the synthesis of glycogen in the liver and skeletal muscle tissue. Insulin, in addition with thyroid hormones and insulin-like growth factors, will also trigger protein synthesis in our cells. And then insulin also plays a role in storing triglycerides or lipogenesis. Here we could see an overall view of what's going on in the post-absorptive state. So since we don't have the nutrients in our gastrointestinal tract, we're going to have to pull all that glucose, those proteins, those amino acids, those triglycerides from other cells within our body. So we see that the liver is going to be a major site for glucose production. So here glycerol can be converted into glucose. That stored liver glycogen can be broken down, catabolized in order to form glucose. Other sources like amino acids can be used to then form glucose. But other areas of the body Skeletal muscle tissue can be broken down during fasting or starvation to supply the body with amino acids. If you think about it from a health and fitness standpoint, this isn't necessarily ideal. We want to keep lean muscle on our bodies. So when we say lose weight, what we really want to lose is fat. We don't want to really be getting to the point of starvation to that our skeletal muscles are breaking down, because that's going to actually blunt our resting metabolism. But anyway, those amino acids can be pulled from skeletal muscle tissue to supply the rest of the body with amino acids. You're going to see, our adipose tissue when we don't have those nutrients, or it's been a long time since our last meal, they're going to be broken down so we could get those fatty acids, and they could be used throughout the body. But many tissues in the body then will take those fatty acids, those glucoses, those amino acids, and then use them when we don't have the available nutrients within our gastrointestinal tract. You guys can also see down below that we can get other structures made during the starvation time, and you've probably heard of the keto diet in recent years or recent decades even, and the philosophy is a high-fat, low carbohydrate diet in order to form these ketone bodies. And so, these fatty acids, in the absence of, when the body has limited amounts of glucose, can be converted to ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies then can be used by different cells, different tissues within our bodies when there is a lack of glucose. And so the nervous tissue, for example, is heavily dependent upon glucose for its metabolism. And so, if we're in a period where we don't have, if we don't have large quantities of glucose, we could use ketone bodies instead in order to supply that nervous tissue with energy. So now we'll talk about all the reactions that are going on in the post-absorptive state. Glycogenolysis will be the breakdown of glycogen. So this occurs both within the liver, where glycogen is stored, and skeletal muscle, where it is stored. Lipolysis, again, so you just, when you talk about anatomy, physiology, it's good just to be familiar with all these suffixes and prefixes to sort of help you out understand what these words mean. So again, we're breaking down lipids here. So lipolysis, breaking down of lipids, protein catabolism. We also have what's called gluconeogenesis, and this is an important term. Again, the body has many ways of, even though if you don't consume carbohydrates, your body still has ways of converting other non-glucose or non-carbohydrate sources and then forming glucose. So if we go back a little bit here, we could see that, again, triglycerides can be used. We can cleave the glycerol backbone from the 3 fatty acids and use it to get glucose. We could take amino acids and use it to get glucose, lactic acid. So that gluconeogenesis, again, the definition, the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. And then you can see down below during that post-absorptive state, again, we don't have, we're not being supplied with energy through food and what we take in, so we got to break down other materials within our body in order to get energy. Here, this table is showing many of the hormones that are going to stimulate the breakdown of all these different materials. Glycogen breakdown is going to be stimulated by 2 hormones, glucagon, which you could kind of say is sort of like the opposite of insulin. So insulin brings glucose into the cell. Glucagon is going to signal the shuttling of glucose out of cells. Epinephrine, which is also, you think about, it's also called adrenaline commonly, but, this is released in, higher quantities when you're during physical activity, and it just, it promotes the sympathetic nervous system overall, but it will stimulate the breakdown of glycogen. And then lipolysis, epinephrine, norepinephrine, again, these are going to stimulate a higher metabolism within our cells. And then hormones like cortisol, insulin, like growth factors, thyroid hormones are also going to stimulate lipolysis or triglyceride breakdown. Cortisol, a stress hormone, will break down proteins, and that's why a lot of times You don't want to label hormones as good, bad, nor indifferent. In physiology, we're just, concerned about function. But when people get stressed, overly stressed, a lot of times their cortisol levels rise, and it could be detrimental to health because you're getting protein breakdown. And we need our proteins within our body because, they carry out function. And then gluconeogenesis is going to be stimulated both by glucagon and cortisol. And just remember, again, that is the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So I think it's important to address fasting and starvation because there is a huge difference in between. And with trends like intermittent fasting, a lot of people have questions about the benefits or the negative aspects of each. And so basically it's quantifying how long you're going without food. And so fasting is a few hours or maybe a day or two. And this is done in a lot of different cultures for a lot of different religious purposes, has been going on for thousands of years. And now fasting, I would encourage people to go out and look on their own. But, intermittent fasting has shown benefits not only for, weight loss, for blood glucose, but also some mental benefits as well. I will say that, just because you see positive results in a study doesn't mean that necessarily it's good for everyone. A lot of people are very sensitive when it comes to their blood glucose. Certain people's lifestyle, the fasting isn't going to fit. But it is a strategy that people use and tend to find success with their health and wellness. So, you should just... If someone wants to start fasting, a client, a patient, etc., you'd want to maybe research the benefits and risk and then start off slow. Maybe not an everyday thing. Maybe start with a 12, 14-hour fast before working up. But there are different strategies and different things that you could research as far as fasting is concerned. But that is different than starvation. See, the benefit of fasting is that, we are utilizing that post-absorptive state. So we don't have those nutrients within, our gastrointestinal tract, and the body's basically using its stores. It's breaking down its own fat, right? So we're losing fat, which is a goal that a lot of people have. And so that's the overall plan behind it. But that's different than starvation. So that you are starving. You're going weeks or months without food. And the problem with this is that this is where it could start to be detrimental because going out without food for longer periods of time, like I alluded to earlier, will break down your skeletal muscle mass. And we'll talk about resting metabolism in a little bit, but most of that or a lot of that's going to be dictated by your lean mass, by how much skeletal muscle you have. So if your goal is to lose weight and lose fat, going long periods without food, again, could be detrimental because you're slowing down your metabolism. And so, fasting, okay, or within reason, as long as you, the client, the patient, who's ever their physician, sort of agrees to the terms of that. But starvation is what we're trying to really avoid because that could be really detrimental for health and fitness. When we talk about energy balance, we are talking about the amount of calories consumed versus the amount of calories burned. And so this relationship between the two is our energy balance. And so when it comes to losing weight, gaining weight, this may be oversimplifying it a little bit, but if you move more and you burn more calories than you take in, you will lose weight. If you take in more calories than you burn, you will then gain weight. And so there's a lot that goes into metabolism and, the breakdown of fat in our bodies and the amount of weight we hold on to, things like that. But energy balance, it's pretty simple. If you burn more than you consume, you're going to lose. If you take in more than you burn, then you're going to gain weight. And so it's not only fat that we have to worry about when it comes to this. You can consume carbohydrates or proteins the same way. If you're consuming more energy than you're burning, then those materials, those nutrients are going to be wind up stored as fat. When we talk about energy expenditure or energy intake, the unit that we use in order to quantify that is called calories. And so a calorie is the amount of heat energy it takes to take 1 gram of water up 1 degrees Celsius. And so when you actually look at the nutrition facts for food or beverage, you'll notice that the back of it, when it says calories, this is actually 1 kilocalorie. And so that is just 1,000 of these regular calories here. And so when you look at these nutrition facts, you are able to tell how much energy is actually within that piece of food. If you were curious how we know how much energy or how many calories are within food, you could see that fats, carbohydrates, proteins, alcohol all have a fixed amount of calories per gram. And down below in the table, you could see that carbohydrates and proteins have 4 kilocalories per gram, fats have 9 kilocalories per gram, or alcohol with 7 kilocalories per gram. And so let's say hypothetically, I had a question that gave you the amount of carbohydrates, that gave you amount of protein grams and gave you the amount of fat grams, you'd be able to calculate how much energy, how many calories are within that piece of food just based on those measurements. A lot of times we discuss metabolism in popular culture, and we're talking about how well a person is able to burn energy at rest, right? You see a lot of people that refer to someone that's lighter, and you say, oh, he has a high metabolism. So really what you're talking about is metabolic rate. And so, this could be dictated by a lot of things. How much you exercise, right? So the more you exercise, obviously you're going to be burning calories during that physical activity, but also it tends to accelerate your metabolic rate even at rest. Your age, it's true that metabolic rate tends to slow down over time, and that can be because differences in hormones, your ability to go out and be physically active. But there are a lot of different factors that can ultimately determine what your metabolic rate is going to be. As health professionals, the thing we can control for our clients and our patients are the amount of physical activity, the amount of exercise they get, and the ingestion of food, what they're actually eating. And so these are the things we have to try to monitor and have to try to improve for our clients and our patients in order to try to accelerate their metabolic rate. And so when we're talking about metabolic rate, we have a few ways of breaking this down, but total metabolic rate is going to be the amount of energy expenditure per unit of time. And typically we use total daily energy expenditure, abbreviated as TDEE, to show day to day what is a person actually burning, as they're living their life. And we have a few things that make this up, this total daily energy expenditure. We have basal metabolic rate, so that's just the amount of calories and the amount of energy you're able to burn at rest. Physical activity, obviously the amount that you are moving, and the more you move, the more energy you're going to burn. And then food-induced thermogenesis. And so, as we consume food, it takes energy to break that food down. And some nutrients take more energy to break down than others, so such as proteins, right? It's going to require more energy to break down a protein than it would a lipid or carbohydrate. But these three will make up your total daily energy expenditure. Basal metabolic rate is actually going to make up roughly 70% of total daily energy expenditure. And so in order to measure this, you're going to do it in a quiet, resting, fasting state. So no moving. If you just laid in bed for the whole entire day, didn't move, didn't eat, didn't drink anything, how many calories would you burn? And so how are we able to do that? Well, a lot of times we're going to actually hook someone up to a metabolic cart, in these conditions, and that for every liter of oxygen that is consumed, the body's going to burn roughly 4.8 kilocalories. So you could just convert the amount of oxygen taken in and then find out their basal metabolic rate. Again, this is going to make up most of our total daily energy expenditure and is a big indicator, a big thing that really determines your basal metabolic rate, like I said, is going to be your lean mass and the your skeletal muscle mass. And so a lot of times when we think about losing weight, we want to make sure that we don't drop too much too quickly, that we're not sacrificing lean mass for total overall weight loss, because again, this is what's going to help you burn more calories at rest. And so if someone wants to lose weight, it can't just all be cardio by itself, because you want to have that skeletal muscle mass to help with metabolism at rest. And so, a lot of times trainers or, unfamiliar health professionals will just go straight cardio, all running. But you got to have that balance of these things when it comes to health and fitness, because, physiology-wise, your skeletal muscle is really going to impact your metabolism. And so, again, this is around 70%, roughly 70% of your total energy expenditure. And there are a lot of websites out there that you're able to look up basal metabolic rate just based on height, weight, and age. And those measurements are typically pretty close to actually measured BMR. And so, I've seen in the past people go get an actual BMR test, and then, you look up on one of those websites what it is, and it's really not that far away. So typically that's just an easy and quick way to determine basal metabolic rate. And then you could just divide that number by 0.7 to get a rough estimate of what total daily energy expenditure is going to be. And then from there, you're going to determine, if this person wants to gain weight, what's a safe amount of weight above their total daily energy expenditure. What's a safe amount of calories over their total daily energy expenditure in order for them to bulk up. If they're trying to lose weight, you want a healthy, safe range as far as calorie deficit is concerned under their total daily energy expenditure. Roughly, I would recommend that typically 500 to 1,000 calorie deficit is under the total daily energy expenditure is fine. Although I do kind of get nervous, I would say, with that 1,000 range, even over 750. I think typically 500 calorie deficit would be good enough for most people if that weight loss, if that fat loss was the main goal, because again, you just don't want to go too far in one direction. And so typically 500 kilocalories under TDEE, that's a safe amount. Again, so we will store most of the energy in our bodies within adipose tissue. And, that the reason why is because it's light. It's a light and easy way for our body to store energy. And even though we don't like it, maybe when we put a bathing suit on, as far from an evolution standpoint, animals are out there. You don't know how long your next meal is going to come. So we need to find a way for our bodies, for organisms to store energy. And so in humans, that adipose tissue, you're going to be able to store onto lots of energy, and break down those triglycerides in order to get it when you are in periods of starvation. And so when energy expenditure exceeds energy input, triglycerides and adipose tissue are broken down. That's why we diet. That's why we exercise. That's why people use strategies like fasting in order to break down those fats, those lipids. When energy input exceeds energy expenditure, those triglycerides are stored and you get more fat mass. People's hunger can be influenced by a lot of things, and therefore your food intake will be regulated by many factors as well. And it's not only, how much time has passed since your last meal and how many hormones are being circulated because of that, but certain psychological factors impact it as well. Many can attest that they are stress eaters. Many people, when they get into a bad state, a bad headspace, that they maybe starve, themselves. They don't get hungry. They don't have that drive to eat. So there are a lot of different things that can ultimately impact a person's food intake, but we'll talk a little bit more about the hormones that play a role within this food intake response. Many hormones are going to play a role in our sensation of appetite and feeling full or feeling hungry. And so you have to remember that these are just hormones, and that these hormones bind to receptors and have different pathways in order to, change the physiology that's going on. And so leptin is one of these major hormones, and it's produced by our adipose cells. And when it binds to receptors in the brain, it gives us that feeling of being full and, curbing our appetite. The same thing is true for melanocortin and its receptors and its pathways. But neuropeptide Y, which is a neurotransmitter, And we have to keep in mind that, just because a hormone does one thing in one system, it can do something else. But as far as appetite is concerned, both neuropeptide Y and then another hormone called ghrelin actually increase our appetite and increase the demand for food intake. When a person starts to increase their energy intake over an extended period of time, they are going to get an accumulation of fat mass on their bodies because they're taking more energy than they're burning, and the body's storing that as adipose tissue or fat. And when this gets to a certain point, we can develop what is called obesity. And this is a problem that America and other nations are struggling with, because as we move less and eat more the population is becoming obese. And so it's gotten pretty bad, not only in adults with roughly 4 out of 10 Americans that are obese, but also in adolescents as well. And so when you want to actually put a number on what qualifies someone as being obese, in men, a body fat percentage of 25% or higher would be characterized as obese, while women, a body fat percentage of 32 or higher would characterize as obese. And so now women hold on to more fat mass, but still those are the numbers as far as what qualifies someone as obese when it comes to body fat percentage. And it's really difficult, and it's something that people really struggle with, and something as a health or fitness professional you're going to deal with a lot, because most number one goals as far as people's health and fitness outcomes are concerned are to lose fat, and it's not easy. And so a lot of online personalities, they just good bodies and models, and they make it look easy, and they just work out all the time. But, for most Americans, most individuals, it's very hard to find the time and then the motivation in order to do so. And so people get stuck in ruts, and it gets harder and harder to change someone's behaviors the more obese that they get. And it's harder to exercise. It's hard to stick to diets. And so, us as health professionals, fitness professionals, we need to figure out ways to tap into that motivation, to tap into the way that we're going to get someone to change the behavior, to get them to move more, to get them to eat better. And so that's the challenge that we're dealing with in this nation, how to curb this obesity problem, and what is the best way of doing that. And so that's going to be different for every single client that you have or every single patient that you have. But again, it's really centered around changing behavior. So if you get someone to move more, if you get someone to make better decisions over a consistent period of time, they're going to be able to lose that fat mass and improve their health overall. Because with obesity comes a lot of risks, a higher risk of morbidity and mortality. So we really want to work on this as health professionals to try to better the lives of our clients. Another factor we have to be concerned about when it comes to our health is blood glucose. And that is basically just the amount of glucose molecules within your blood. And so, this has to be balanced at rest. There are conditions, hypoglycemia, when blood glucose gets too low, and then hyperglycemia, when blood glucose gets too high. And so, there's constant things that our body needs to do in order to make sure that we balance that blood glucose level. And two of those hormones in particular, which we just basically mentioned earlier, insulin and glucagon, play a huge role in our blood glucose levels. Insulin is going to signal uptake of glucose from the bloodstream into the cell, and then glucagon is going to do the opposite. It's going to signal the release of of glucose from the cell into the blood. So insulin takes, glucose from the blood to the cell, and then glucagon takes glucose from the cell and then uptakes it into the blood. And so the normal resting level for most individuals is around 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter of blood fasting. But then we have a lot of individuals within this nation with diabetes. And diabetes is concerning because we get this irregulation with our blood glucose. And now you may be familiar with the two different types. Type 1, which is referred to as juvenile diabetes. And in this condition, it's the cells of the pancreas are actually not producing insulin. So there's this inability to uptake glucose into our cells, and therefore their blood glucose is going to be higher. This is more genetic, and you tend to be just born with type 1 diabetes, but many individuals can still develop what's called type 2 diabetes. And this comes from more lifestyle behavior and choices. And this is when we build up what's called insulin resistance. And so because someone is constantly taking in large levels of carbohydrates and food, that insulin over time, the sensitivity of the insulin receptors to insulin gets less and less and less. And now the person is going to have to produce more insulin in order to lower blood glucose. And it could get so bad after a while that the person needs to be put on supplemental insulin in order to regulate their blood glucose. And so, those levels, as far as when is someone pre-diabetic, that's going to be between 101 and 125 milligrams of blood glucose per deciliter of blood at fasting. And then anything over 125 milligrams per deciliter is going to be considered diabetic. And diabetes, it has huge consequences if left unregulated. A lot of times, people lose circulation in their extremities. It could be even to a degree where someone loses, a foot or limb in certain cases. So we really want to make sure, again, promoting those healthy behaviors in order to avoid those from getting type 2 diabetes, because that as well is a very prevalent disease within this nation. Roughly 10% of Americans actually have diabetes. That concludes our lecture on metabolism and energy balance. So, taking this now all into consideration, you got to realize how much goes into maintaining someone's weight, maintaining someone's blood glucose, all the pathways and all the different hormones that play a role in our metabolism. And so, we want to take everything we know about cellular metabolism and what's going on at the tissues and the organs and things like that, and all this information about, the effects of diet and exercise, and we need to apply it. We need to make sure, again, that we promote these healthy lifestyle choices. So we have individuals who are better able to maintain their weight, better able to maintain their fat mass, better able to maintain their blood glucose and all these other factors so they could live healthier lives. So thank you guys so much. Hope you guys learned a lot from this video, and we'll see you next time.